Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 30th meeting of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee. I offer apologies from our convener, Ruth Maguire, who can't be with us today. I will be convening the meeting. Mobile phones are acceptable for the use of social media, but not for photography. First of all, can I welcome, for agenda item 1 on race equality in Scotland, we're taking an oral evidence session from Christina McKelvey, the Minister for Older People and Equalities. Welcome, Minister. Can I also welcome Hilary Third from the Race Equality Team Leader, and Paul Johnson, who's the Director General of Education, Communities and Justice, both of the Scottish Government. You're all very welcome. Can I begin our evidence session by asking the Minister whether she agrees that there has been little progress on race over the last 20 years of the Scottish Parliament, and explore, as Caliani Lyle said, why there hasn't been that progress?
Good morning, Convener, and thank you so much for inviting me to the committee. I was made aware I would have an opening statement to give first.
My apologies.
Yeah, is it okay to...
It's not on the brief, but yeah, okay. Fire away.
If I can do an opening statement first, it just sets...
And then you've got a hint as to what I'm going to ask first.
Yeah. So thank you so much for inviting me along to committee today. Before we kick off, I know it's your last session of this term, and I wish you all a very happy and joyful Christmas and New Year. So on behalf of the Scottish Government, I want to welcome the committee's interest in the Race Equality Action Plan and the increased scrutiny, challenge and focus, which is very important that you bring to this topic. It's our collective shame, I believe, that our minority ethnic communities continue to experience racism and persistent inequality, and we see it every day, you know, in the newspapers and on social media. But while it's not peculiar to Scotland, we need a continued focus and commitment to eradicate racism and promote equality in Scotland. I believe that it's incumbent on government, all governments, including hopefully the new UK government, to have a responsibility to lead. But we all have a part to play, and that's a very important point that I will continue to make today, to shift some of the deep-seated discrimination and prejudice that perpetuates inequality on the grounds of race. This is, as I said, not just a job for government, this is everyone's business, and we should be making it everyone's business. Parliament and all of its elected members at national and local level, public sector, third sector, employers, and of course communities themselves all have responsibility to take action. We as a country need to make the decisive shift that we all want to see, and I know that the committee is very committed to this too, to have a society that's reflected at us in our workplaces, in our schools, in our governments, in our elected bodies, in fact in every area of life and all society, I believe, has a part to play. The evidence that this committee has heard backs up what we already know. There's a lot more to do, and we are taking some urgent action to tackle this, and I just want to list some of that action. Racist bullying in our schools and universities, we've heard a lot about that, and I was here in this room actually just a few weeks ago with a cross-party group on race, listening to the Edinburgh Intercultural Youth Project and the work that they have done on racist bullying. Racist hate crime, you will be interested to know that straight from here I'm going into a meeting with Mr Youssef. We're working on the hate crime stuff, and I will be taking some of the learning that this committee has taken in over the past few weeks into that meeting too. The minority ethnic employment gap, which is work that we have continued to work on along with some of our intermediary bodies, as well as actions to address inequality in the minority ethnic communities face in relation to poverty, poor housing and so on, you know, social security and all of those aspects. In short, we have made some progress, but it's not fast enough and it's not far enough, and I take that responsibility today. Committee, witnesses and communities are rightly impatient, and they should be. I'm impatient too. I want to see this change. We need to be sure that we are focusing on impactful actions, stuff that actually makes a difference, things that make a difference to people's lives, at school, at work, in their home and in their community too. But it's also important to build the foundations for lasting change, and that's some of the work that we've been doing over the past few years in Caliani Lyle's report and her recommendations to us. So those structures, so that race inequality is embedded, mainstreamed and secure for the long term to ensure that we get that long-term change. Caliani in her report talks about the ecosystem and how we should build the ecosystem, and those foundations are the ways to do some of that. The Scottish Government is determined to play its part in creating a fairer Scotland for all. I wouldn't be sitting here in the role that I'm sitting in if I wasn't absolutely committed to this, but actually being in this role is a reflection of how committed I am to. Our National Performance Framework focuses on outcomes, which is something that I go on about all the time. The officials will tell you what's the outcome, what's the purpose, what's the point. So that our National Performance Framework really focuses on that. But it focuses on doing it with a level of kindness, dignity and respect that should be woven through everything that we do. We embrace our domestic law, of course we do, and international treaties which require us to act to address inequality and eliminate all forms of racial discrimination. And we are doing a lot of work, as the committee will know, together on those aspects as well. Added to this, our Parliament, this place, is built on a commitment to equality and human rights. It's one of our foundations, and I think possibly our best and strongest foundation too. So it's absolutely right for this committee and others to shine a spotlight on race equality. Where there is continued disadvantage, we know there is, and discrimination, so that we can work together on tackling and taking forward some of the solutions. Of course, it might take a bit longer than the lifetime of the Race Equality Action Plan, which is to 2021, or the Race Equality Framework, which is to 2020. But, you know, it takes a long time to unpick entrenched inequalities. But I'm incredibly impatient that we do that unpicking and knit that together in a much more positive way. But I'm very, very welcome for the cross-party support demonstrated by the committee. It's absolutely critical to our long-term goal that we work together. And if the committee has got any recommendations following the work that they have done, I'll be very happy to hear those recommendations and to work with you on how we can work together to make that change. As I said at the start, I entirely welcome the committee's scrutiny of the Race Equality Action Plan, and really genuinely look forward to working with you on it and others to ensure that progress on race equality across Scotland matches our shared ambitions and the ambitions of the people of Scotland, which is to have a Scotland that's fairer for everyone, irrespective of your background or where you come from. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Minister. That was a very detailed and comprehensive opening statement. And obviously, there is a long list of policies which you described there, which, of course, enjoys cross-party support from every member of this committee. Nevertheless, there is clearly a disconnect between that and how communities feel on the ground. And Kaliani Lyle did say that she felt there hadn't been sufficient progress made in 20 years. Why do you think, with all the goodwill in this place and all of the policy statements that this government has embraced and previous governments have embraced, that we aren't meeting the expectations of those communities?
No, and I agree. You'll know that Kaliani is still on our programme board, so she's keeping, holding us to account every single day in her work. We know that racist attitudes are prevalent, and I think that the current weather which we sit in, where there is a feeling of going backwards in some of the attitudes and responses that people are experiencing right now. We understand, we've heard from schools, we've heard the social media reports and the other reports on what's happening. We just simply cannot ignore it. And I'm not going to sit here and suggest that, we're doing a great job here, and we're getting everything right, because obviously we are not. And when you're fighting against some of the prevailing weather, as I like to put it, because sometimes weather passes and we move into brighter times, is that, all of the work that we are doing across the board and all of the aspects in which we are working and the mainstreaming work we're doing right across the whole of government will give, that focus on it, the work that committees do in Parliament, the work that ministers do. And one of the letters that were circulated in the summer, there was a point in it raised by Jatin, Harry and Clare about how ministers and how this Parliament, focuses and does that reflection. And I was very happy, to respond to that in the positive, because we do have to take that on board. We have made progress, but we have still got so much more to do, and we are absolutely not complacent in doing this. And I suppose you mentioned in your opening question, Convener, that it's 20 years. 20 years is a good time to take stock about the progress that we have made, but it's also a good time to set the foundations on the further progress that we need to make, and we take that on board.
Okay, thank you. Professor Bhopal, when he gave evidence to this committee, explored some of that disconnect between the expectation of communities and the work of this Parliament. And I think he talked about policies that had been generated and then forgotten about, this sort of continuous need to reinvent the wheel around race equality. Would you like to give the committee your reflections on that and whether we are giving policies enough time to actually bed in and be properly resourced to have a positive impact?
Yeah, I did hear that evidence from Professor Bhopal, and I was really interested in it because if you think about the points I made in my opening statement about setting the firm foundations for working on, that means that we can't have short-termism. That means, you know, that great projects that run and the money dries up and then, you know, we start again. So it's like that process of reinventing the wheel. We are looking at building, you know, long-term funding into some of those foundations as well, so that we do make that lasting change. I agree that there's a lot to learn from the work that we have worked in the past, but there's also a lot to do to make sure that we're not constantly recreating the wheel. So some of those, you know, those pieces of work that we've done over the years, whether it's maybe been short-term funding, you know, and then it's dried up and it's disappeared. One of the things that we're looking at right now, because we're doing a review of our equality funding threads, because they all come to an end in June 2020. So again, a good time to do this is to look at how do we do long-term funding in a much more sustainable way. So we're looking at all of that as we speak right now. We're also looking at how do you build sustainability and, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? The foundations into organisations in order for them to continue as well, so they're not reliant on short-term funding. So there's a bit of work going on about how we do some of that too, because you're absolutely right, you know, and Professor Bhopal was right. If we keep doing short-termism, then we don't get the long-term change that we want to see, but we can absolutely see the benefits of some of that work and how we join it up much better. So we're currently looking at how we do that. So, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Minister. Fulton McGregor.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Minister. Panel. You mentioned, Minister, in your opening statement about it being everybody's job across the public and society, I suppose, to take responsibility and to take action. I'm just wondering if you can speak about how the Scottish Government encourages the public sector to meet their public sector equality duties, and if there's an update on the review of the public sector equality duty.
No, absolutely. The committee will know that the public sector equality duty, which replaced the race equality duty, places an obligation on all public authorities to ensure that they uphold the highest standards. You will know that the Scottish Government itself is a duty bearer and has got as a public authority that's governed by the public sector equality duty as well. There are specific duties placed on us as ministers, on us as parliamentarians. Our public sector equality duty in government is twofold. One is to be a better employer and a better service provider, which is some of the internal stuff that maybe we will come on to in a second. And the other part of it is how we you know, make our duties much more effective. So to that end, and to the end of a recommendation from the committee a while back, we are looking to review the entire public sector equality duty work. We have just recruited into the equality unit some new staff who will be looking at mainstreaming and public sector equality duty, and they will start a range of stakeholder engagements over the new year, just into the new year, to take forward some of the ideas that we've got and how do we strengthen, review, learn the lessons of, and place much more functional duties on public authorities as well. So holding people to those higher standards, but making some of it a bit clearer as well, to ensure that they understand what the duties actually are. So that will be a huge public engagement routine that will go on in the new year. As I say, we've got some key new members of staff who I think you will be interested once we're ready to say who they are, who's leading up some of that work. You'll be pleased to know who that is and the work that they will do, and ensuring that, you know, we have that review, and that review actually has what we need, is that outcome, that we have better systems, better understanding, clarity around about what a public sector equality duty is and the difference that it should make, and ensuring that we embed straight across, create that ecosystem and build on those foundations too. I think maybe from a government point of view, Paul might have something to say as well. Yeah.
You've actually started to address the point of the next question, and perhaps Paul could come in on that, because that is what I was going to ask about. Do you think that there is an issue there about you know, the public sector, perhaps local authorities and others, actually understanding what the responsibilities are. I think you've went to address that, but it'd be interesting to see if you think that's something that's been identified in the first session that we had here with the race equality organisations. We heard that it was an issue. BMIS in particular talked about there being 84 action points across 6 large policy areas, and just that feeling that perhaps some duty bearers weren't quite sure responsibilities.
Yeah.
So if I can pick that up, and let me start by saying how much I also welcome the scrutiny of the committee on this matter. It's an absolute privilege of mine to be chairing the Scottish Government's Race Equality Programme Board, which responds to Caliani Lyle's recommendations and tries to ensure that as the civil service we are taking a collective and cohesive view of the actions that need to be taken. So we don't want for us to simply have disparate actions that don't all join together to have the impact that's needed. So one of the key roles of the programme board is to bring together directors from all of the areas of the Scottish Government that have got some responsibility for actions, to make sure that everyone is held to account for taking forward the actions in their area, but crucially to make sure that we're actually looking at what it all adds up to collectively. Now, what we've concluded in the course of our first few meetings, and we're not there yet, we've got a long way to go, but we've concluded that there must be a real focus on employment. The minority ethnic employment gap, I think, is something that should be, in many ways, shocking us all. And so that employment gap, we've agreed with the input of our advisors, including Caliani, should be a real focus for attention. And we also recognise we need to start with the Scottish Government and ensure that we are leading the way in this. And I have been really impressed by the energy that colleagues in the Scottish Government have put into seeking to improve what we are doing in terms of our own recruitment processes, in terms of retention and promotion, and in terms of creating an environment where all of our colleagues in the government can flourish. So part of our focus on the board has been to ensure that we're learning from that, and what we're moving on to do is to try and share that practice and good practice we see elsewhere and try and get that spread. Because we have a long way to go still, even just starting with the public sector. We've got a long way to go before we can be confident that public sector organisations are reflective of the communities that we serve. I'd be happy to say more if the committee wishes, or to provide follow-up information in writing about the range of things we're doing in the Scottish Government and how we're then trying to share the learning from our practice elsewhere in public service.
Thank you, Fulton. Mary Fee.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the Minister and the panel. I wanted to ask you, first of all, about definitions of race, because you'll be aware there is a legal definition of race, but there are also a number of different terminologies and language used to describe race and ethnicity. And I'd be interested in your views on whether it's helpful to have that number of different definitions sitting alongside the legal definition of race, because it's BMIS's view that causes confusion. So I'd be keen to hear your view, and if you disagree with the view of BMIS, could you explain why?
I would never disagree with BMIS at all. Yeah, no, it's a really important part of the conversation that's going on right now. We do have a legal definition. We know what that legal definition means. It means, it includes colour, ethnicity, nationality, and everyone is covered by it in the Equality Act. So we know that. But different minority groups experience discrimination in different ways. The barriers that they experience and the barriers to full participation they experience in different ways as well. Different forms of racism and racial inequality, and that requires different policy responses. So although we know what the legal definition is, there is other there's ways that we need to just target in and focus in to where there is specific, acute and in some cases intersectional inequality that we need to understand as well. To advance race equality, we need to understand all of this. We also need to, understand how the experience of different groups and their lived experience can be used to inform the work that we do as well. So we welcome, all of the conversation that's going on around this. If you think about some of the conversations that's going on, I did a walk for Black History Month, one of the first things I did was I did the slavery walk in Glasgow, which was quite interesting for me because I look at a lot of the places in Glasgow and have done for many years as, you know, built on the back of slaves and, you know, tobacco, sugar, and I've always viewed that, and I don't know whether that's just growing up in that city, but that was one of the things that I looked at. But, you know, the definition of racism around about slavery and the work that needs to be done and how we atone and do reparation for that is a bit different from what the young people who were sitting here a few weeks ago are experiencing now, you know. So having that diversity of view, that diversity of understanding and that diversity of lived experience will allow us to ensure that we respond appropriately to some very, very, you know, small intersections that make a huge difference to people's lives. So although we have the legal terminology, we also have all of that work that we need to do, because in order to do that and to use the energy of all of that, we need to make sure that, you know, meaningful change happens, and that's incredibly important as well. I think we've got a responsibility as duty bearers in the Scottish Government. I'm going to turn to Paul on this in a minute, because when it comes back to the point that Fulton McGregor was making and you make about, you know, how do we change that, how do we embed that, and how do we use legal definitions and all of that to make that change? The two main points for me is protection and prevention. And prevention is always the best measure. However, there's areas where we need to protect too. And I think Paul's got some work that we've been doing in government and how we do that as well. Yep.
Can I just stop you, Minister, before you bring Paul in? And I'll ask my next question, because I think Paul's input in my next question may be helpful, because you touched on the issue of policy responses. And in different policy documents and different policy papers, different terminology is used. And do you think that can create confusion? If someone is reading that and doesn't understand where that sits within the legal definition, does that have the potential to cause confusion?
Yeah, and it's a point that I made in the FGM debate yesterday about how language matters and how we need to get that right. And it has to be absolutely clear. So some of the criticism we've had about the public sector equality duty is its lack of clarity and what does it actually mean. It's the same across all of these things. So part of the work that we'll do in mainstreaming and understanding is to ensure that, you know, that we've got that language absolutely right as well. So I absolutely agree with you on that. And it's a piece of work that we're currently working on. But now that you've put some renewed focus on it, we'll go back and make sure that we're getting that right too.
Well, I would simply agree that we need to try and ensure that there's consistency and clarity in terms of the language that we use. And I would absolutely acknowledge that the understanding of this will vary in different areas of government and different areas of public service. And I think this is one area we're working together. We can improve the knowledge and understanding and improve the consistency of language. When it comes to agreeing what approaches we're taking in areas such as improving minority ethnic recruitment, it's where I think real clarity around the data is essential. So I have in front of me documents that show what we are seeking to do at every stage of the process in some of our recruitment exercises in government. And what we're able to do when we're recruiting at a particular scale is really look at what's going on across a whole range of different ethnicities, so that we're not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, and we're checking whether whether our approach is right for a whole range of individuals. And of course that applies to race and it applies to other protected characteristics. It's not taking a broad brush approach. It's saying we're going to go in really deep into the data and evidence and try to ensure that our approach is delivering our overarching objectives through carefully looking at it, and through at times recognising that we're maybe not having the impact that we need, in which case we need to review, look again clearly at that data and adjust our approach if necessary.
We've got some very good recent learning on this, on visible minorities and non-visible minorities as well. And the work in the Gypsy Traveller Action Plan, which I know that you have been a great champion of as well, Mary, is, you know, that's really shone a light on how we do intersectional work and how we can really drill in to, you know, into individual communities and make a difference there. So we've taken a lot of the learning from that, and I know that the Gypsy Traveller Joint Ministerial Group was set up by your other committee member there, Angela Constance, and I hope that she will be pleased to see the outcome of that, because she set the foundations for it, and a very good firm foundation it was for me to work from. But we've learned a lot lot from that process. You know, a joint ministerial group working across government, working with our local government partners, working with all of our agencies and third sector, but more importantly, working with the community to make that difference as well. So, yeah, but we're on it.
Okay, that's very helpful. The Parliament is a human rights guarantor. So do you think that having the ability to put the focus on human rights with a very kind of broad brush approach strengthens the ability to pick out specific areas to focus in on, or do you think that minimises the impact that we can have when we focus on specific things?
You will not be surprised, Mary, to hear that I absolutely agree with you on that, given that the work that I did when I was a member of this fantastic committee as well, and the work that we did in Strasbourg and other places to ensure, you know, that this place. So all of your recommendations that came to government were recommendations that I sent to government. I'm now having to live up to our really, really high expectations, and I intend to do that. So you're absolutely right about, you know, committees, this Parliament, the government, all of us taking forward that. We've got, you know, we know that human rights are universal, they're inalienable, the rights identified under universal declarations, and you know, across 20 sort of a major human rights declarations, conventions and treaties, and we're working on how we embed all of that. You'll know the work about the UNCRC, on the UNCRPD, all the work that we're doing, CEDAW, all of that right now. So when a Parliament, you know, puts out a clarion call where they will say we will be a human rights guarantor, and we expect our local government, our national government, you know, our third sector and public sector players to be those champions. That's just grist to my mill, I have to say, in as much as when I go back upstairs and we're talking about what we need to do next in government, you know, that gives me, you know, real strength to keep pushing that across the whole of government. My role in government is to mainstream all of this stuff. I'm doing that. Believe me, I'm doing it. But no, you're absolutely right. I think it doesn't minimise. I think in the current weather again, we should be maximising all of these voices in order to ensure that this place is a human rights guarantor, that our government is, our agencies are, and all of the work that we do. So we do take an approach where every policy decision has a human rights focus on it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Annie Wells.
Convener. Good morning, Minister. Good morning, panel. My question is really, what oversight does the Minister and Mr Johnson have, respectively, of the Race Equality Framework and Race Equality Action Plan?
Yeah, well, you know that the REF, so we're going into acronyms now, but hopefully you'll know what I'm talking about. The REF is a long-term vision, so that's to 2030, and the REAP sets out concrete actions by 2021. And I quite like the idea of chunking it up into sort of a 3-year blocks. You know, this is what we're focusing on. Let's, you know, focus on that as well. And as lead for Minister for Equality, you'll not be surprised that I will take REAP and the Race Equality Action Plan very, very seriously. I'm always happy to discuss, approve, update, change, focus in on things like employment as an example. That was one of the things that was brought to us by Claire and others. You know, we're doing a prioritisation exercise right now to look at how do we access the best information, the best data, and focus right on the issues that matter. And it sort of relates to the other questions about how do we focus in on the communities that are facing the biggest discriminations, but how do we not forget to take others along with us and are using our energy on that. I discuss very frequently with equalities officials, and the equality unit is really expanding right now. So we now have some additional people into the race team. We have additional people into gender and older age, social isolation, human rights. You know, the team's getting much bigger, and that's a reflection from government that there's more to do, and we need more capacity to do that. So I'm, you know, working on this every day of the week, and you know, Paul will give you a wee update on what he's doing in the programme board. But again, I put this plea back to the committee. If you've got ideas on how we could do more of this in a much more progressive and positive, and you know, and you know, possible way, then I'm really happy to hear that too.
So just to build on that, the very first recommendation from Caliani Lyle's report was that the Scottish Government should put in place new governance arrangements across directorates at a sufficiently senior level to ensure greater coordination on equality with a particular focus on race. That's what the Race Equality Action Plan Programme Board has been set up to do. So as I mentioned earlier, it's my privilege to chair that and to ensure that there is real buy-in across the government. I am supported by colleagues in the Equality Unit in that work. The board has met 6 times so far. Its focus has been on reviewing the progress that's taking place across all of the actions and agreeing on priorities. As I mentioned, at this point, we've identified employment as a key priority, but that is not to undermine the importance of others. And the board is planning a significant amount of work over the course of 2020. My intention is that will start with a chunk of time early in the new year where we are absolutely clear about both the vision that we are pursuing, the method by which we are going to achieve progress, and the priorities that we'll focus on in 2020. The programme board is the overall piece of governance at official level. It is supported by a delivery group that brings in colleagues from those areas of government, and the delivery group reports to the overall programme board. If the committee would find it helpful, we can share further information about the governance, but we are trying to also work in an open and transparent way, and as such we're committed to publishing the minutes of the programme board, and that has been done.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. I think we would welcome that insight. Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Convener. I just wonder, when I hear you talk about mainstreaming and listen to lots of things you're saying today, they all sound very positive. But do you feel there is that buy-in at senior level across all the other sort of areas of government? And I guess particularly in the context of the Race Equality Action Plan, where only sort of 40% of the update, or sorry, that where 40% of the updates on progress don't have a race focus. Kind of, you know, how are you making sure that race really is being prioritised?
So if I can pick that one up, some of the specific actions in the plan do relate to equalities more generally and have a focus on an intersectional approach as opposed to an approach that's solely focused on race. And I think we accept we need to be clear about the ones that are going to specifically focus on race. To answer your question directly, I think we are making significant progress, but I'm not satisfied by it. There is a huge amount of work we still need to do. I've mentioned the early priorities of the board, but I'm very clear that there's a need for us to really ensure that that work is shared out consistently across the organisation, that this is a priority for many individuals across the organisation, and that it reaches into the broader public service. The committee will probably be aware of the Scottish Leaders Forum, which is a gathering that brings together senior leaders from across a very wide range of public bodies and third sector organisations. The forum met in June and November of 2019, and in June part of my role was to bring a specific focus on race equality to that forum. And we were able to hear some examples of good practice where some organisations are really upping their game, particularly in relation to recruitment and retention. And following that forum, we are now taking forward work to bring together some of those organisations so that they can deepen their work, share good practice with others, and we're seeking to develop a toolkit that will enable all employers, starting with public sector, but it needs to go wider, but enable all employers to really understand what good looks like in terms of addressing the issues that we've got around the minority ethnic employment gap.
Just in the wider context, Mr Mundell, I'm very well aware of the concerns that's been raised by all of our bodies who are working on this, and I meet with them, and I met with them just quite recently as well, and officials meet with them regularly. So we've taken on board some of those concerns raised by stakeholders about how mainstreaming could maybe dilute some of that as well. We're very clear as well that we need to take an intersectional approach, and that's why CREA raised with us some of the issues around about the employment gap. Other organisations have raised with us some of the issues around about employment gaps as well. So SEMVO are working on the early learning and childcare recruitment campaign right now. We don't have numbers for you yet because they're still recruiting, but they've worked with SEMVO in ensuring that we have a very clear focus on the diversity of that workforce. How, you know, intersectional issues around about women, asylum, all of the issues that affect people in that way. So we still have to focus in on the intersectional part of it, but we're really aware of the concerns raised by the organisation. So we are working with them right now to develop some informed work and evidence around about that race inequality and how it's manifested in Scotland, and how we can work with them to ensure that that mainstreaming does not look like or feel like dilution, but it's actually, you know, concentration.
That's excellent. Thank you. I think that will reassure the committee. But I think, you know, again, I think it's partly a gap between people's kind of expectations and then what's actually possible to deliver, which sort of leads me into the next question, which is around engagement with grassroots community, because I know, and we know from the work we've been doing, that you engage widely with lots of organisations. But I think beyond that, there are people, you know, living in Scotland who don't, you know, necessarily feel that they're directly engaged on sort of some of these issues, and it's just what, in terms of consultation, you're doing, particularly when it comes to the race equality framework.
No, absolutely, and I'll come to that in a second, but it's just something I wanted to answer in relation to your last question as well. We've got the Year 2 update on REAP coming in March, and one of the aspects of that is we are separating out the race actions in that to ensure that there's a real focus on it as well. So hopefully that'll be further reassurance on that. On the point you make about engagement with communities, my watch, you know, my term that I use in many aspects of the work that I do is nothing about them without them, which means that communities and their voice and their lived experience needs to be the heart of all of that. So there's lots of my Equalities officials meet with organisations and people all the time. I attempt to get to everything that they ask me to as well, which can be quite challenging sometimes, especially during you know, some History Month and lots of competing challenges there as well. My role is to go to all of these events and all of these organisations and listen and hear about what they need and what they want. One of the things that we can't do in any of this work is to say to people, we think we know what's best for you, when actually they know what's best for them, and we should be listening and looking at how do we use that lived experience and implement it into the work that we do. So we do have regular dialogue, we do hear directly from communities, we act with communities in the work that we do, and as I say, we listen. They also hold us to account, and they do it very, very effectively, and sometimes, you know, pretty tough as well, but we need to hear that and we need to act on it, and we need to understand how difficult it can be for a person just living in Scotland these days, and for me that's not acceptable if that's difficult for that person. Yeah.
Could I just add that those communities are of course also reflected in our own organisations. Yeah. And one of the things that I have found really striking and that I have learned a huge amount from is by engaging with the Race Equality Network in the Scottish Government. I've had the role, along with my role as chairing the REAP programme board, as being the executive team champion for the Race Equality Network. And through a process of one-to-one discussions and listening and learning, my own knowledge of this and that of my executive team colleagues has grown, and we're continuing to learn through putting in place a mutual mentoring scheme, which means that senior leaders in the organisation are paired up with a member of the Race Equality Network for the purposes of shared learning. And as I say, I think that's very valuable, and it's something that I hope many other employers will be rolling out. We also recognise the need to support our employees and their networks, and so one of the things we've done as part of our overall work here is to put in place a full-time coordinator, so that staff network can really flourish in its role. And as I say, I think there's real learning there for other employers.
Okay, and then can I just ask, specifically following on from that, just what sort of wider public consultation there was around the Race Equality Action Plan? And secondly, following on from a question from witnesses, did you consult with the regional equality councils at all?
all of the organisations who have got an interest in this have taken part in conversations and consultations with us as well. I've attempted to try and get to all of the regional groups as well. So I've been to Aberdeen, I've been to Central Scotland, and I think I've been over Ayrshire as well. So in order to build relationships, because when it comes down to it, like, you know, the full-time person in government, when it comes down to it, building relationships with people and building trust is incredibly important here as well. So we have continuous consultation and a conversation with all of the bodies, and including, you know, the cross-party groups of this Parliament, where, you know, some fantastic work is going on. So I was along with speaking to Intercultural Youth Edinburgh just a few weeks ago here as well. I mean, there's so much going on. Maybe we should send you a list of all of the work that has and the meetings and the consultation events. We had a really good event a few months ago on employment, which was opened by Mr Hepburn and closed by me, because there was a joint ministerial focus on that, and that was chaired by SEMVO. You know, not SEMVO, that was organised by CRER, yeah? That was CRER, that one. We've had other events with BEMIS, other events with SEMVO, you know, so lots of work going on there across the board. Some areas where we need to do a bit more work in as well, but it's maybe worthwhile sending you the engagement calendar so that you can see for yourself just how wide and varied and deep it is.
That would be helpful as well, but just specifically on the Race Equality Action Plan, was there any specific wider public consultation? Because it's a key issue that's been raised, you know, by multiple witnesses. So I just was looking for a sort of yes or no, really.
So, as you'll know, there was extensive engagement on the Race Equality Framework. Around 700 members of the community were involved in that. The Race Equality Action Plan sets out the concrete actions that we'll take during the current parliamentary term to get us closer to those goals that the communities said that they wanted to achieve. And I think our view has been, while there's been a lot of engagement, particularly with organisations, we need to focus on taking the actions that people have already asked us to do, rather than constantly going back and asking the same questions. And I think, as the Minister said, we know that we're not yet there in terms of reaching the goals that the community set for us in the REF, which is the long-term framework. So really we're focusing on connecting with that information and making sure we're using that on delivering the REAP. But there's already been mention of the Year 2 update in March. There'll be a conference, and we're looking at ways that we can reconnect with some of those people who are involved in the REF and a wider range of community members and bring them into that event and for the work going forward. But I think there's a balance between setting up new structures and mechanisms for engagement versus actually getting on with doing the work that people have already told us they want us to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I understand the point you're getting at. I guess from, you know, what I've heard through this inquiry, there's a sort of feeling that if you're going to decide what the short-term priorities are from the sort of long-term aspirations, then people do feel that they want to be, they do feel they want to have further input.
The prioritisation exercise has involved a number of our stakeholder organisations. They worked with us on devising the criteria for the exercise. They're working directly with different policy areas in government, for example, with education colleagues. This happened a week or two ago, to help them to work through that exercise, and they'll be commenting on the first cut, if you like, of actions coming out of that. In terms of the specific question about regional equality councils, they're involved in a number of areas of work we do. For example, recently our public appointments team held a meeting to look at their action plan on increasing the diversity in public appointments, and the regional equality councils were the sort of core participants in that meeting. So there are a number of things happening.
Can I just say, if you are still picking up from your conversations across the board some, you know, issues there, please let us know, because we would want to address that as quickly as possible. I mean, we feel as if we speak to all of these organisations a lot, but if there's a specific, you know, issue there, then please let us know.
Thank you for that. It's less the organisations, and I think it's more that there are individuals within the communities themselves, you know, who don't feel that umbrella organisations and sort of, you know, who are not necessarily working directly with groups, who don't feel that there's broader consultation, and think that, you know, the consultation in some of these cases focuses in, you know, on speaking just to organisations and not widening out the conversation. But that's, I can drop
yeah,
you.
I understand that now. Yeah, I understand that now. I'll take that back and have a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Brief supplemental from Mary Fee.
Convener. I welcome the number of visits and activities that you undertake and the number of different organisations that you speak to. But I wonder if you could perhaps tell us how you make sure that good practice or progress is made in one area with one organisation is shared with similar or the same organisations that work in a similar area to build the progress there?
We do a number of engagement exercises that includes all of these, and it's notwithstanding the point that Oliver Mandel's just made about maybe individuals not feeling that they're part of that bigger picture. But we do lots of joint work with groups and organisations as well. And some of them, will be set up for specific purposes, and they will have their specific purpose that they're working on. But right across the board, when it comes to hate crime, when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to, some of the progress we need to make, then working together is the only way that we can do this well. And we encourage that as much as we can, notwithstanding some of this particular, interests that organisations have got. And we do that across government as well. Part of the mainstreaming work is not just about what we do across government, it's what we do across society, public sector, local authority, third sector, and and individuals as well, to make sure that we're getting the overall picture right as well. But you make a good point about some of that diversity and how we use that diversity to get the better outcomes. So I'll have a think about that, Mary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, Angela Constance.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to the Minister and to Mr Johnston and Ms Bland. I wanted to go back to the Programme Board, if you don't mind. Mr Johnston, in his remarks earlier, correctly reflected that it was one of the key recommendations from Caliani Lyle that what we needed at a very senior level in the Scottish Government was leadership and senior managers taking that responsibility. One of the concerns that we heard, or maybe more a reflection from the academic panel, was that was really good to have those senior people leading from the front, but they wanted to be reassured that there was something more than just a surface level group, and were really interested to know more about the infrastructure underpinning both the delivery group and the programme board. So it'd be good to hear from Mr Johnston about that infrastructure across government and our institutional partners, and also about how you improve accountability. Because I know, the Minister, Mr Johnston, will ensure accountability in their own division. But how will the programme board ensure accountability across government, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's employability services, and whether there's other information over and above the publication of minutes that can be publicly available as well?
Thank you for the question, and certainly we can provide more information about that infrastructure, because I fully accept it may not be immediately apparent from looking at the minutes alone. The programme board is an innovation. It's probably something that we'll need to do more in other areas, because so many of the important policies we're pursuing do not sit in only one area. So I'm adopting a very similar approach in relation to our work on tackling child poverty, which is to expect and require colleagues from right across government to be putting time and energy into what are cross-cutting commitments of government, whether or not that means that they're putting a lot of time into work that hasn't always been part of the day job. So this is new, and it's something that we are expecting to happen an awful lot more. But I absolutely accept it is not enough simply to have a programme board that meets 6 times a year. And I'm conscious that the team have given a lot of thought to the supporting infrastructure. And let me say a couple of things about that. The delivery group is key, and that's where that's where we need a well-resourced equality unit that can actually run those delivery mechanisms, can engage week in, week out with all of these different areas of government around the progress that is being made. And as the Minister has said, we have sought to increase the resourcing of that area. But it's also vital that we've got proper resourcing around some of the specific priority areas. And I'm not going to suggest that that is easy. We face constrained resources in many areas of government. And this year alone, you'll be very conscious of how much staff time and attention has been taken in all of the work around preparing for Brexit, for example. However, what we have sought to do is to utilise the resource that we have and find additional resource in some of those key areas. So I can assure the committee that when it comes to minority ethnic employment, we've got the ownership of that sitting in our Fair Work, Employability and Skills Directorate, and we have additional resource in that directorate to seek to ensure that that work is taken forward effectively. I have also asked another director to ensure that we're pulling together the whole range of employment work internally, externally, public sector, and I hope moving on to private sector to ensure that the work actually has impact. So yes, making sure we've got the right governance arrangements and that senior colleagues are held to account, but also making sure that we've got the people in the posts actually able to do the work on a day-to-day basis.
Good. I'm very pleased to hear that Ms Third will be ably supported by other colleagues. Mr Johnson, you spoke a lot about employment, and I think it is very welcome that there'll be a real renewed focus on employment, given the links with poverty, housing and health. It feels like a good place to start. And I'm also conscious that throughout this morning you've spoke about the tools, the need to work across the public sector, the investment and the BME network within government. But I just wondered if you could, maybe give some more examples. In particular, how will progress be measured? Are there timescales? I know the Scottish Government in the past had to do a lot of work to improve the number of modern apprenticeships and the number of young people within our organisation. So, when can we expect to see measurable, tangible progress? Will you consider targets, for example?
Yes, we have some targets and we need to keep them under review and potentially introduce others, and that is something that the programme board has looked at. So within the Scottish Government we have targets which we can share with the committee around when the organisation will be fully reflective of the communities that we serve in terms of race and ethnicity. So very happy to follow up and share the detail of those targets. Obviously there are issues about the imposition of duties on other public bodies, but I would like to see other public bodies also adopting and pursuing very ambitious targets in relation to employment. You asked about other areas, and we do have work going on across the whole sweep of areas that Kaliani Lyle has set out in her report. It may be worth mentioning education as another one, which I think we would agree requires a real focus. So some of the work that the programme board has considered has included the work that's going on in the education system around anti-bullying and tackling race discrimination in our schools, which I know you will agree is a vital area, and we've been working with partners to strengthen the support available for schools as they try to tackle bullying, and in particular racist bullying. But another area which I think requires real attention is the diversity of the teaching profession. Where I think you will know from recent data there has been some progress, but significant further progress is needed in that area. We're pleased there to be working closely with Rowena Arshad, who has written to Directors of Education on this issue and has specifically requested responses to set out what they are doing on this issue by January 2020. And colleagues in Learning Directorate will be working closely with Rowena Arshad on those responses as we seek to take forward that work. We could speak at much greater length about other areas, but I hope that serves to illustrate that we are looking beyond employment for all that it's a clear focus of work.
Good. And I just have one final question, Convener. Very briefly, there was a suggestion in the evidence that committee heard that the establishment of an advisory group to provide some sort of external scrutiny over the action plan would be welcome. And I wondered whether you'd had an opportunity to consider that or some other arrangement.
Absolutely heard the call for that, what we're keen to do is to work with the programme board, including Caliani Lyle, to ensure that we have in place the best possible mechanisms for obtaining advice and support. As Hilary Third mentioned, we're going to be having a further conference on this early next year, which will be another opportunity to get further advice. But I do wish us to give further consideration to whether we should be formally establishing an advisory group, and we will update the committee on our conclusions on that shortly.
We're hoping to use the annual conference to test out everybody's thoughts on this as well, and come up with a response to that, so we can respond to you later in 2020 on that. I just wanted to quickly pick up a point that you made. In January 2020, when Rowena Arshad gets her responses back, we will take on board some of that, and we're happy to update the committee on that. The other area where we've made great progress, and BMIS have been incredibly helpful, is with the police service, where we have 11% of the police service, which is almost 3 times the sort of a demographic percentage of population in Scotland. And we've got a lot of learning to do in how Police Scotland have managed that, and how we can then apply that to across the board in other ways. And to be fair, early learning and childcare are taking that on board, and that's why they're working really hard towards a more diverse workforce as well. So that we've got a Scotland that reflects who we are. Yeah, here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions from the committee, can I thank the Minister and your officials for joining us today. Wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and bring this meeting to a close and we'll move into private. Oh, sorry, my apologies. This was a last-minute gig for me. So details of our next meeting will be available on our website in January. As the Parliament last night agreed stage 1 of the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill, the deadline for amendments to the bill at stage 2 will be noon on Friday, the 17th of January 2020. So can I thank you all for your attendance, wish you a Merry Christmas, and I now move into private session.